I have a question. What were some of your favorite educator movies? Now, I want you to think about the principals in those movies. What were they like? Dare I ask, how many of those principals were Black? Probably not many. Black principals make a small percentage of educators in the U.S., and even when they are represented in the media, they're often flawed. Before Brown versus the Board of Education, Black principals played a critical role in leading segregated schools, especially in the South. And despite underfunding, these principals were pillars in their communities. They were respected by parents, teachers, activists. But after integration, things started to change. Instead of placing Black principals in newly integrated schools, many of them were pushed out. Not because they weren't qualified, but because white districts didn't want Black folks in leadership. So while schools were technically desegregating, Black leadership was disappearing.
There was a huge demand for Black students, Black parents, Black teachers, too, to say that, if we cannot desegregate our schools as an avenue towards racial equality, then let us at least be in charge of them.
And that's where community demand for Black leadership started to grow. In Mahasan's article, Disciplining Our Own, Politicizing the Image of Strict Black Principals, she talks about how Black principals rose to prominence in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And she connects strict Black leadership to three major viewpoints from different movements at the time. The first were Black activists. They pushed for Black principals to lead schools. They saw them as people who understood their students' culture could empower them.
But I do believe there's something real, something authentic about a Black educator being in front of a Black student or a brown student that's a game changer.
Second had to do with philanthropists and researchers. So some people believe that strict leaders could bring order to what they saw as chaotic urban schools. But this view reduced Black principals to just tools for improving performance, rather than seeing them as community leaders. And then thirdly was the Reagan administration. In the 1980s, the Reagan administration liked strict Black principals. They wanted discipline and order. You know how it is with Reagan, law and order. But they didn't want to fix problems like underfunding or segregation. So strict leadership was an easy way to avoid addressing deeper structural issues. And here's where it gets tricky, because Black principals were often seen as either the savior or the scapegoat. And this shows how Black principals are often stuck between unrealistic expectations. They're expected to fix everything, but they rarely get the support that they need. And it's like they're set up to fail from the start. Over the years, Hollywood has shaped how we think about school leaders. And many of these portrayals fit into specific archetypes. One of the most prominent ones is a strict authoritarian, the principal who steps in with the no-nonsense disciplinary approach to bring order into a chaotic environment. And this type of principal is all about control. They often use discipline as the primary tool to get things back on track. They're tough, they're commanding, and they don't waste no time with soft approaches.
Forget about the way it used to be. This is not a damn democracy. We are in a state of emergency, and my word is law. There's only one boss in this place, and that's me. The HNIC.
Mr. Joe Clark is a prime example of the strict authoritarian archetype. Clark is best known for being portrayed by Morgan Freeman in the 1989 hit film Lean on Me. He was a Black principal at Eastside High in Paterson, New Jersey, and he became an icon for his no-nonsense, tough-love approach to discipline. At the time, Eastside High was struggling with violence, drugs, and low academic performance. It was a school in crisis, and Clark was hired to turn things around. I remember watching Lean on Me as a kid on BET. And to be honest, when I was a kid, I thought it was an inspirational movie at first. Think about it, a strong Black man coming in to help Black and brown kids that need help in Paterson, New Jersey. That's awesome. My favorite line is when he says, all I gotta do is stay black and die. Now, ain't that a mantra for 2025? But then as you grow up and I became an educator, you revisit these movies and I thought, man, this movie is very problematic.
I saw that multiple times in school, you know what I'm saying? Like almost like a threat, like this how y'all gonna be if we don't, Even then, I thought it was off. I couldn't articulate it so much now, but like, I thought it was off that he told the boy he smoked crack and he should jump off the building. Like, I remember thinking to myself, that's a bit much. I guess it's good that he got it together at the end, but he shouldn't tell him to jump off the top of the building. I don't think that's okay.
In the movie, Clark is the head nigga in charge. Now, if you were a black man named Joe, born in the 1920s or 1930s, extra points if you were raised in the South, you already know that they don't play. Whether you're pulling out a bat like Joe Clark or a belt like Joe Jackson.
Put the towel in the swimming pool. You'll get beaten. You hear me?
One thing's for sure, you gonna get some tough love. And he didn't just act tough on the film. In real life, his methods were just as controversial. For example, there's a story about how Clark went after one of his teachers, a music teacher who wanted to bring the Metropolitan Opera to East Side. And when she didn't consult him at first, he didn't just get upset. He actually had her physically thrown out of the school.
He threw me out of the building, or tried to throw me out. He got 4 security guards, and he said, "Get her out, take her out. I don't want her here anymore. She's malcontent. She doesn't agree with me. She doesn't have the right attitude, etc." And they said to me, "Mrs. Korean, please leave before he does something crazy." And I said, "But he is crazy. He's Crazy Joe."
Clark's authoritative style didn't just only affect the staff. It also extended to the students, especially those like Alfreda, a former student of Joe Clark at Eastside High, who recalls her experience under his leadership.
Our first year of going to school, we knew how bad the school was. And once we got to the school, we met Mr. Clark. We had an assembly, and he told us the rules of the school. Either we ride with with him, or it was kicking us out. It was strict. We had to walk on one side of the hallways. We had to have IDs on at all times. He will stop us if he saw us in the hallway, ask us to either recite the alma mater or what was the word of the day. So every day he would do this daily announcement, and he would give us vocabulary words. We had to use it in a sentence.
Alfreda shares a personal experience of Clark's tough love approach.
I was not one of the best students. I do know he gave me several chances. And so I use that today as an educator. I never give up on a kid. I'm always giving him or she another chance, because I felt that that's why I am who I am today, because I was given so many chances from Mr. Clark.
Now, while Joe Clark may have been a father figure and role model, we can't deny the issues with this tough love, no nonsense approach.
And so, like, the thing with black men in education environments is we're kind of desired. People want us to be this like masculine force, almost like enforcers. So many children, especially in certain urban environments, are missing positive masculine models in their lives. So they kind of want a lot of the black male teachers to fill that role. But that wasn't a organic fit for me. My first year teaching, I knew I was in trouble when people started calling me coach. I don't coach anything. I'm just an English teacher.
I think a lot of our leaders, they show up in spaces trying to lead like that when they don't know really who they are. So black administrators is always like, if it's a typical role, teacher, then you get put in that dean of students role. And I think that space right there kind of changes us, where you are dealing with discipline so much that now you are tainted and you are even looking at your own people in a certain way based on just all you've dealing with is behavior every single day.
Black administrators aren't often given the opportunity to be instructional leaders. You will find that the majority of those educators are sort of pigeonholed into that space of disciplinaries and not given the opportunity to be an instructional leader. And so what does that mean for us as assistant principals who are both women and men of color? That means that we can't elevate into a principal role, right? That means we can't elevate into a director role, into an assistant superintendent role, because if we can't speak into terms of how we're moving the needle for teaching and learning, then no one's going to hire us to lead their school or their district.
There's an expectation placed on Black leaders that's not always a natural fit for those who want to build relationships and lead with empathy. And this is where Clark's leadership style falls short. It's very much transactional. And transactional leadership is when leaders focus on getting results through structured rules, rewards, and punishments. And the leader gives something in exchange for the desired behavior. But it doesn't always foster deep connections or long-term growth. It's effective in the short term, but it doesn't create a foundation for lasting change or builds meaningful relationships.
I feel like the portrayal in Lean On Me is really complicated. I don't think it's like black and white. On one hand, it really truly reflects the desperate conditions in many under-resourced schools. So that wasn't so far out the norm. There's an extraordinary burden that's often placed on black principals to fix systemic problems and do it quickly. I just think that his tough love approach, it really resonated with a lot of people because he really embodied a fierce commitment to student success. He wanted them to succeed. That was obvious in the portrayal, but it also reinforced a stereotype that black leaders must be that authoritarian to be effective. In real life, the challenges are just as deep as we saw in real life. But I believe that it requires more than just toughness. You got to have strategy. You got to plan for this thing. You also have to have empathy, which is, again, something that I work with daily. You have to build those relationships to all of these things to make a systemic change. I truly respect the urgency that he brought to that because it was not easy. He was really working with something that needed some tough love. I just believe that transformational change happens through partnership and not fear. And I think what a lot that he evoked was fear.
As I also think about Lean On Me, I'm just thinking about SROs. And SRO programs gained popularity in the 1990s, partly in part because of federal incentives and also just growing concerns about student safety following shootings like Columbine and Jonestown. And these programs became especially prevalent in urban schools, where Black principals were often pushed into enforcing strict discipline.
Some of the Black principals that I've talked to or other school leaders, they'll say, we're kind of expected to operate like Joe Clark. If you think about not just school principals, but like deans of disciplines, the culture keepers, all of these people, the school resource officers, oftentimes these are the Black people in schools.
I was expelled from school at 15 years old, right? So I think about, I would be one of the students in the mix of, depending on the portrayal in the movie, who would be giving Joe Clark a problem. Me knowing the story and realizing what's kind of going on for me in that time, and leading me into, trying to sell drugs and, thinking of supporting my mom, who, single household and all that. It never talks about the complexity of that piece, and then what is the school doing to actually try to wrap their arms around our babies in these spaces, and how are they engaging them? My question is, why don't they want to be inside the classroom, inside the building? What's going on in those spaces, the places that got them saying, I'd rather be out here instead of coming in those doors? And 9 times out of 10, when you talk to our youth and that actually families, it is, they don't appreciate us in here. They don't see us in here. They don't want us here. They'll kick us out if we do anything wrong in the first place. They've never taken the time to get to know us and what we try to really bring and do.
This perspective highlights the deeper systemic issues at play. And Paris is pointing out that while discipline and control are often seen as solutions, schools aren't always addressing the real reasons that students act out, like lack of engagement or support. When discipline becomes the primary focus, it can alienate students and reinforce the idea that there are problems to be solved rather than individuals with potential. In urban schools, especially when I'm thinking about rural schools, under-resourced schools, the pressure when it comes to Black principals in order to maintain order can quickly turn them into enforcers, losing sight of this bigger picture, which is teaching and learning, powering students, building relationships, and addressing systemic inequalities.
You have to discipline with dignity, right? You have to connect before you correct. I really believe that. Vision is what brings the people along. It answers the why, right, behind all of the policies. But I believe in shared leadership where discipline is not top-down enforcement. And that's what I preach to my staff. Discipline isn't top-down. It's not just coming from administration, but it's a collective agreement, right? We all have to buy in into the norms of our school.
This perspective highlights the importance of creating a collaborative and supportive environment. It's a step away from this authoritarian control, offering an approach that builds trust and mutual respect. But when the pressure to maintain discipline overshadows this, Black principals, like those in urban schools, face this exhausting challenge of managing classrooms while fighting larger systemic issues. Now let's talk about the buffoon principal archetype. These principals are well-meaning, but they're ineffective. They're comedic, they're out of touch with their role, and often they struggle to meet the expectations placed upon them. But the problem with this archetype is that while it's played for laughs, it creates real problems when it's used to portray Black leadership, especially when it comes to Black women in education. And Ava Coleman from Abbott Elementary is a prime example of this. So let me just say straight, I love Abbott Elementary. If you check my channel, I have many videos on Abbott. I think it's a great show. So if y'all want to come at me, it is what it is. But Ava is very reminiscent of Michael Scott from The Office. In season 1, she becomes principal after catching the superintendent cheating on his wife. And from there, she's often the comic relief. She's roasting Janine. She's making awkward passes at Gregory pre her boo from this season and struggling to meet the demands of the school. She's often not really relied upon amongst her staff. It's funny, but as the only Black principal on primetime TV, I do think it does raise questions about representation.
But the reality is there are some incompetent principals out there. That's the problem. That's the problem. And so for some, not all, that mirror reflects some of those incompetent principals that one may have been, they finally caught up with them and they're demoted, or not, and they're still in the seat. Pastor, exactly.
And yes, it's funny, it's great, it's a show. But as the only Black women principal on primetime TV, to me, it does raise some questions about representation.
Black leaders get hired and they're either treated like a messiah or a scapegoat. If anything goes wrong, it's because this person did that. If you are seen as the savior to this place, then of course, everything then falls on your back.
Ava's comedic incompetence isn't just about being funny, but then it also ties into the harmful stereotype that Black women in leadership roles are often inept or incapable. And maybe I'm just a little bit sensitive to this because I have had leadership roles, not administratively, but just dealing with those microaggressions. And as Sharon points out, this mirrors some of the real issues in education where when things go wrong, Black people, Black women leaders, are often facing harsher consequences. And when this is the only representation of Black women principals is Ava, a character who is shown as incapable, I do feel like the unintended consequence is reinforcing these negative stereotypes. But let's be real. Ava's flaws also show how tough it is to be a leader in an underfunded school system. She's constantly trying to do right by her students, and I think it becomes apparent over the seasons, even if it means bending the rules. Spoiler alert, like when she gets fired for taking bribes from a golf course in exchange for keeping quiet about its use of non-union labor. Sure, it's extreme, but I think it reflects a harsh truth. Leaders like Mr. Joe Clark or Ava, and again, Black women leaders, they're often pushed to make things happen by any means necessary just to get the resources that they need.
Like, Ava's a good person and she sees to the core of some of these issues that I think also that Abbott Elementary does a really good job of highlighting. In some ways that like this TV show does a very good job of highlighting what I think a lot of people who work in schools see as deep criticisms of the educational system.
Ava's character isn't perfect. She's trifling in the best way. But that imperfection mirrors the struggles that many Black women leaders face. We know that the system is broken, and sometimes the only way to navigate it might be, again, bending the rules. And Mahasan challenges how we view leadership, especially in education.
Do I think that Black women have the right to be incompetent? Yes. Do I think that Black women should exploit anything they can on behalf of Black children? Sure. We are living in an era of scam and grift, and only certain people are allowed to do that. So you got these people like, I was talking to someone who was like working in Arizona, and she said there is a voucher grift. There are people who are coming in to take public money to fund people going to private schools. This is a scam. This is a grift. Okay? And I think we need to call a scam what it is. And so like, what does it mean to create oneself? and see, as we're thinking about the representation, like, what does it mean for a Black woman to have created this show, and what was she creating?
Ava is like a clear example of how Black women in leadership aren't given the same grace as others. And Quinta Brunson, who is the creator of Abbott Elementary, she was a guest recently on Amy Poehler's podcast, where she shares her perspective on this challenge.
The show doesn't care what the audience thinks. That was a challenge with Janine, because I'll be real with you, she's a Black character. Black audiences have so few still representative characters on screen. Mm-hmm. And Black womanhood alone is so touchy. So when a lot of women were seeing Janine not present as they wanted her to, that became tough. And I understand it, but I think it's important for us to have characters who are more realistic than they are the absolute best representation of us. I think it creates layers for us, not only on TV, but in the public eye. When I was thinking about her, I wasn't really thinking about representation, but she became representation. I don't know if you dealt with that.
It's a tricky balance, but Abbott Elementary shows something really important here. It shows the complexities of leadership. It shows the complexities of being in an urban school. And Ava, she struggles with ethics, resources, and leaderships. And honestly, it's real issues that a lot of leaders, particularly Black and brown leaders, face in education. And this character allows us to have an honest conversations about those challenges. In fact, a study examining the experiences of Black women principals in Title I schools sheds light on the unique challenges that they face in these roles. These principals often manage high-need schools while dealing with limited resources, high turnover rates, and the pressures to perform in ways that align with that narrow disciplinary models of leadership. And these women are often caught between enforcing control and fostering a nurturing, supportive environment for their students. And also, depending on what school that you are teaching in, you're dealing with microaggressions. You're dealing with people who might not respect your leadership because of the color of your skin. So much like Ava, they're expected to navigate these conflicting demands without the necessary support or resources. Ava's growth from season 1 to season 4 shows her trying to do right by her school, even if her methods are a little bit unorthodox. But the one thing that we know for sure is that leadership, especially when it comes to Black people leading, can be messy. So whether you're a Joe Clark or an Ava Coleman, you cannot fix the system, the education system, with a one-size-fits-all approach. So I talked a lot about Black principals and how they face a host of challenges in the education system, just from navigating stereotypes and unrealistic expectations to make sometimes extreme or unethical compromises just to secure basic resources. And Black leaders in education constantly have to operate within a system designed to hold them back and our students back. But the good news is that there's pathways to change. I asked all of the interviewees for advice that they would give to educators or aspiring educators, especially those of color, looking to enter the field.
Kids will do for you if they love you, essentially. They'll do for you if they love you. If you show them you love them and they build love for you, they might sit down. They may not study. They may not, they may still try to plagiarize their essay, but they'll at least chill in your classroom.
Control. At the end of the day, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so I make sure that I am at these schools. I make sure that I'm interacting with teachers. I make sure that I'm interacting with students. I make sure that I'm doing all the little things. I can sit in front of this computer and be here until 8 o'clock every single night if I wanted to, based off of the workflow that I have. If I don't make it a point and be intentional about interacting and interfacing with my community, then nothing will get done.
Always get to know your students, get to know your parents, keep them involved, making the kids accountable, have structure, and expect high expectations.
Anytime I'm able to still realize I've made an impact enough. I got students who were in a group that I created back when they were high school students, still working with me now, back home, wanting us to connect. Man, what can we do for the community back here? So I know, let's get our group restarted. Let's do some work for our community. To me, that's when I know, okay, I no matter all the struggle I went through, all the pushback, all the, district office folks and conversations around the approach to the work, the unapologetic nature I was approaching the work, Like that's, they're still trying to make change in the community. And to me, that's the whole reason why we do it, right? Like we're not going to be here forever.
I prioritize building a culture of belonging. Equity is not just an initiative. And we know where we are in today's climate with the word equity. But whatever you call it, right? You have to give people what they need. And it's through the lens through which I make every decision as a leader. I prioritize vision, values, and roles. People can't align with what they don't understand. I just believe in leading with that, with high expectations, with empathy, and just being servant-oriented, putting the needs of our staff and our students so that everyone feels valued, heard, and seen.
The takeaway is that leadership, especially for Black educators, is more than just laying down the law. It's about vision, it's about empathy and authenticity. And leaders must challenge the stereotypes they face, fight for their students, and embody the values they want to instill in their students. So whether you're an educator, a parent, or you're just somebody watching this video and you care about education, remember that the work of leadership is universal. You don't have to be an administrator to be a leader. The road is difficult, but the rewards, I think, are special. And when you lead with empathy and authenticity, you play a part in shaping our students' future. And I think that's something that we can all benefit from.